It started with a boy in a wheelchair just trying to water a small patch of flowers in front of his home. He smiled when the water splashed, when the sunlight hit the petals. He didn't know the HOA had rules, or that kindness could somehow offend them. 10 minutes later, 2 board members stood on his porch, shouting at his mother. They called it a violation. They tore the flowers from the soil right in front of him. The boy didn't say a word. He just looked at the empty patch of dirt and whispered, "Dad's coming home today." And when that black truck rolled into the driveway minutes later, every neighbor stopped breathing. Because the man who stepped out wasn't just his father. He was a Navy SEAL who'd spent his life fighting for respect his son was just denied. Before we go on, hit subscribe, so stories like this reach you first. The Jacobs family wasn't the kind of people who made trouble. They lived at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in Cedar Ridge, a clean, rule-heavy neighborhood where the lawns looked like golf greens and every mailbox was painted the same dull gray. To outsiders, it was peaceful. To insiders, it was controlled. Sarah Jacobs had learned to live with that. After 3 years of raising her son, Ethan, mostly alone while her husband was deployed, she had mastered quiet resilience. Ethan, at 9, was born with a spinal condition that kept him in a wheelchair. But you'd never know it by the way he laughed. His joy had a way of cutting through even the coldest mornings. He loved the small flower patch in front of their house. Daisies, marigolds, and a few wild poppies that Sarah helped him plant when the doctor said he needed color, nature, hope. That patch became his world. Every morning he'd roll down the ramp, pick up his small watering can, and hum the same tune while he worked. The neighbors smiled politely, waved occasionally, and went back to pretending they didn't see. Cedar Ridge wasn't cruel, it was just rigid. Every home had a list of rules: no unapproved decorations, no unauthorized gardening, no aesthetic disruptions. Sarah thought it was ridiculous. But when your husband's away on active duty, you pick your battles. Until that afternoon. The day before, Sarah got the call she'd been waiting months for. Her husband, Lieutenant Commander Ryan Jacobs, was coming home. Ethan nearly burst out of his chair when he heard it. He made a sign, hand-painted, crooked letters that read, "Welcome home, Dad." He planted it right beside his flowers, decorated with 2 tiny flags. The HOA rules, apparently, didn't care for crooked letters or small flags. By noon, a notice had been taped to their door. Unauthorized lawn decoration. "Remove immediately." Sarah laughed it off. She wasn't about to spoil her son's happiness over paperwork. But the next morning, 2 HOA board members showed up. A man and a woman, clipboard, sunglasses, the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. "Mrs. Jacobs," the man said sharply, "we need to discuss the non-compliant items in your yard." She blinked. "You mean the flowers my son planted?" "The flowers, the sign, and the unauthorized flags," the woman added, glancing at Ethan, who sat quietly nearby. Sarah tried to reason. "My husband's returning from service. This is just a welcome." "Ma'am, rules are rules," the man interrupted. "This neighborhood maintains standards. We can't make exceptions." Ethan looked up at them, confused. "But it's for my dad." The woman sighed. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, but even military families must follow community guidelines." And then, without waiting for permission, the man bent down and pulled the sign from the soil. Ethan flinched. When he reached for his flowers, Sarah stepped forward, blocking him. "Don't you dare touch those," she said, voice trembling. He smirked. "If you don't comply, we'll issue a fine." Ethan's eyes filled as he looked at the flowers, his flowers, being trampled under clean black shoes. When they finally left, Sarah knelt beside him, trying to hold it together. He didn't cry. He just stared at the empty patch and whispered, "It's okay, Mom. Dad will fix it." Sarah froze. Because in that moment she remembered who her husband was. Not just a father, not just a soldier, but a Navy SEAL with over a decade of service in crisis zones. A man who believed in order, discipline, and justice. And as she stood up, she saw it. The black pickup truck turning the corner, the flag sticker on the windshield catching the sun. Ryan Jacobs was home. She barely had time to open the door before Ethan shouted, "Dad!" Ryan stepped out. his uniform jacket slung over one shoulder, face rough from travel, but eyes immediately soft when he saw his son. He dropped his duffel and walked straight to him, kneeling so they were eye level. "Hey, champ," he said, smiling. "Heard you were taking care of the house while I was gone." Ethan nodded quickly. "I did, but they took our flowers. The people with the clipboards." Ryan's smile faded. "What people?" Sarah quietly handed him the notice. He read it once, then again. For a moment he said nothing, just stood, looked at the torn patch of dirt, then at the perfect, rule-abiding lawns across the street. And behind those curtains, neighbors were watching. Because everyone in Cedar Ridge knew who Ryan Jacobs was. They knew his service record, his medals, his rank. And now they saw the way he stood there, calm, silent, but radiating a kind of presence that made the air heavy. Ethan looked up at him, small hand gripping the wheel of his chair. "Dad?" Ryan put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry, buddy," he said softly. "We'll take care of it." And as he said it, the way he looked toward the HOA office made Sarah's breath catch. He wasn't angry, and not yet. But the calm in his eyes was the kind that always came before the storm. Ryan Jacobs didn't storm toward the HOA office. He walked. There was a certain stillness to him, the kind that made people step aside without knowing why. Every movement was deliberate, steady. Years of training in control, precision, and silence. Sarah called after him once, but he didn't turn back. He just said quietly, "It's okay, Sarah. I'm just going to have a conversation." Ethan watched from the window as his father crossed the street, the sun cutting a sharp outline against his frame. The same calm man who'd once defused raids and rescued hostages was now walking toward a group of suburban rule enforcers with clipboards. But calm didn't mean passive. It meant prepared. The HOA office sat at the corner of the cul-de-sac. Glass doors, framed certificates, and a flagpole that hadn't seen a flag in months. Inside, the same two board members sat at a table mid-conversation when the door opened. The man looked up. "Can we help you, sir?" Ryan gave a polite nod. "You already have." He set the HOA notice down on the desk. "You issued this?" The woman squinted at the paper. "Yes, that's standard procedure for property violations." "Property violations," he repeated, voice even. "For a few flowers and a sign my son made by hand." The man leaned back. "Sir, we have regulations to maintain property values." Ryan interrupted, not with volume, but with precision. "Do you understand what those flowers meant?" The room went still. "I spent 9 months in deployments where people didn't even have homes to come back to." "My son. He spent those 9 months counting days until I returned. The one thing that kept him going was that patch of flowers, his mission, he called it. So before you talk about property values, understand that what you pulled from that dirt wasn't just a decoration. It was his effort to belong." Neither of them spoke. He didn't shout, didn't move closer. He just looked at them with a kind of quiet that felt heavier than anger. The woman finally shifted in her chair. "We were only enforcing the guidelines, Mr. Commander," he corrected softly. "Lieutenant Commander Ryan Jacobs, United States Navy SEALs. And I know something about enforcing guidelines. The difference is, when we write ours, we make sure they protect people, not break them." The silence that followed was deafening. He tapped the notice gently with one finger. "You'll withdraw this. You'll issue an apology to my wife and my son, and you'll replant what you destroyed. Every flower, every flag. I'll pay for it if that's the issue. But you will fix it." The man swallowed. "Commander, with all due respect?" Ryan's gaze didn't waver. "There's no such thing as respect when it's conditional." He let that sink in, then turned toward the door. Before leaving, he said one more thing. Not a threat, not even a demand. Just a statement that felt like a verdict. "You enforce rules here," he said quietly. "That's fine. But from now on, you'll remember this neighborhood houses families who serve too. Families who've already sacrificed enough." And with that, he walked out. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Neighbors pretending to check mailboxes, walk dogs, water lawns. Ryan nodded politely to each as he passed. No swagger, no spectacle, just calm presence. As he reached his driveway, Ethan was still. waiting by the window. Ryan knelt beside him again. "Hey," he said softly. "Remember what we talked about? About patience?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah, you said calm is stronger than loud." Ryan smiled. "Exactly. Now watch what calm can do." The next morning, Cedar Ridge woke to something it hadn't seen before. Change. The same HOA truck that had delivered fines was now parked in front of the Jacobs house. 3 board members, including the man and woman from the day before, were out front planting new flowers. Brighter ones, more than before. Sarah stood on the porch, arms folded, half in disbelief. Ethan rolled beside her, eyes wide. The man looked up awkwardly. "Mrs. Jacobs, we wanted to apologize. There was an error in how the complaint was handled." Sarah raised a brow. "An error?" He cleared his throat. "We overstepped." Ethan smiled faintly. "You're fixing it?" The woman nodded quickly. "Yes, sweetheart. And we got some better flowers this time. Thought you might like them?" Ryan stepped out then, quietly, coffee mug in hand. He didn't gloat, didn't say a word, just gave a polite nod. The man hesitated. "Commander, we also wanted to discuss a community initiative, something to support veteran families in Cedar Ridge. Maybe you could help us lead it." Ryan tilted his head slightly. "You don't need me to lead it," he said. "You just need to start it." Then he smiled, faint and genuine. "And make sure the rules protect the right people this time." That week, word spread faster than the HOA could contain it. The story of the seal who made the HOA replant flowers turned into a quiet neighborhood legend. But for Ryan, it wasn't about winning. It was about teaching. Because discipline wasn't measured by how loud you could be, but by how much you could fix without ever raising your voice. And in a town obsessed with appearances, he reminded everyone what real strength looked like: respect without rank and leadership without ego. That night, Ethan wheeled himself outside under the porch light, looking at his new flower bed, twice as full, twice as colorful. Ryan joined him, sitting on the steps. "Dad?" Ethan asked. "Are they going to be nice now?" Ryan smiled. "Maybe not all at once, but change always starts with one person doing the right thing, no matter who's watching." Ethan nodded slowly, then looked up at the stars. "I'm glad you're home." Ryan rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "Me too, champ. Me too." And as the wind carried the scent of fresh soil and marigolds, Cedar Ridge learned something that day. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just stands quietly, calm, unshaken, and unforgettable. The courtroom was silent except for the faint hum of the air vents. Rows of neighbors sat packed together, the same neighbors who once ignored the boys' small garden, the same ones who'd whispered about HOA rules and property values. Now every single one of them was here, and at the center table, in his quiet black suit, sat the man they once only knew as that veteran down the street. Commander Daniel Kane, U.S. Navy SEAL, 22 years of service, father. He wasn't here as a soldier today. He was here as a man who'd buried his son because of what people called a misunderstanding. The judge cleared her throat softly. "Commander Kane, you may proceed." Daniel stood slowly, buttoning his jacket. His movements were deliberate, measured, like a man trained to breathe through fire. He didn't look angry. He looked steady, controlled, as if every second had been rehearsed in silence. He turned toward the HOA board members. 3 of them sat stiffly, avoiding his gaze. Their attorney fidgeted with papers. Daniel walked to the projector and placed a small flash drive into the slot. The screen behind him flickered to life, an image of a flower bed, bright and full, the one his son had planted. The courtroom's air seemed to tighten. "This," Daniel began quietly, "is the garden my son planted. He couldn't run, couldn't play sports, but he could plant." His voice trembled, not with weakness, but with grief that refused to die. He said it made him feel like things could still grow, even if he couldn't. He pressed a button. The next image appeared. The same patch, flowers ripped from the soil, petals crushed into dirt. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "These," he continued, "are the actions of a homeowners association that called his flowers a violation." He paused, letting the photo hang in the air. My son didn't understand their rules. He just knew they were his flowers. The HOA lawyer rose quickly. Objection, Your Honor, this is emotional manipulation. The judge raised a hand. Overruled. He's allowed to continue. Daniel nodded once. He wasn't here to argue. He clicked again. A video played, a body cam clip from a responding officer showing HOA members standing in the boy's yard, voices raised. His wife crying, the boy watching silently from his chair. Gasps filled the courtroom. One of the HOA members buried her face in her hands. Daniel looked straight at them. You didn't just tear up flowers. You tore up the last thing that made my son feel free. His words landed like thunder. He stepped back from the screen. And when he collapsed that day, when his heart stopped from the stress and shock, none of you even called for help. You said it wasn't your responsibility. Silence. Pure, suffocating silence. The HOA president, a man in a pressed blue suit, shifted uneasily. We didn't mean for any of that to happen. We were following policy. Daniel's eyes locked on him. Policy? His voice was soft but sharp enough to cut glass. You hid behind policy while a 10-year-old boy's dream died in front of you. The man looked down. The room went still again. Daniel turned toward the judge. Your Honor, I don't want revenge. I want reform. I want this HOA system to remember that people live in these homes, not properties. That rules can't erase humanity. His voice began to rise, firm but never losing control. For years I fought wars overseas. I've seen what happens when people forget what they're fighting for. I came home believing America was different, that our neighbors looked out for each other. He stopped, looked at the jury. And then my son taught me that sometimes the battlefield isn't across the ocean. It's right outside your front door. The judge's eyes softened. A tear slipped down a woman's cheek in the front row. Then, slowly, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small patch, a seal trident worn from years of service. He placed it on the witness stand. My son used to keep this on his nightstand, he said. He told me he wanted to earn one someday. He said it meant protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. He looked up, eyes burning through the silence. So that's what I'm doing now. For him, he turned to the courtroom, the same neighbors who once watched from their windows and said nothing. You don't need to wear a uniform to stand up for what's right. You just need to decide what kind of person you want to be when someone smaller than you needs help. The judge leaned forward, visibly moved. Commander Kane, she said softly, thank you for your service and for reminding this court what justice truly means. The gavel came down. The verdict was unanimous. The HOA found guilty of harassment, negligence, and discrimination. They were fined, stripped of their board authority, and ordered to fund a memorial garden in the boy's name. But for Daniel, none of it felt like victory. He stepped out of the courthouse into the sunlight. The same sunlight that once touched those flowers. In his hands he held a small box, soil and seeds. The same kind his son had loved. He knelt beside the courthouse lawn and dug his fingers into the earth. People watched quietly, unsure what he was doing. He planted the first seed, pressed the soil gently, and whispered, Your fight's over, buddy. I'll take it from here. When he stood up, there were dozens of people behind him, neighbors, strangers, even the judge, each holding a handful of seeds. They began planting beside him one by one. By the end of the day, the courthouse steps were lined with flowers. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel Kane smiled. The news cameras arrived before sunrise. By then, the flowers outside the courthouse had already multiplied, wild splashes of color across the concrete steps where, just hours earlier, the world had watched justice unfold. No press release had gone out. No organization had planned it. But overnight, something wordless had spread, a whisper through social media, a clip replayed millions of times, a Navy SEAL kneeling in silence, planting a seed for his son. The hashtag appeared on its own, Ethan's Garden. By morning, it had reached every corner of the internet. Soldiers in uniform posting pictures of themselves planting flowers beside bases. Teachers sowing seeds in front of schools. children holding paper signs that said, "Let things grow." News anchors tried to summarize it, but the story didn't need headlines. It lived in the quiet moments, in every hand that touched the earth that day. Daniel Kane didn't do interviews. He turned down every talk show, every late-night host who wanted the viral hero. He just kept tending to his son's new garden, now officially named Ethan's Grove, a memorial space built on the courthouse lawn by volunteers, neighbors, and even former HOA members who'd resigned in shame. It wasn't fenced off. It wasn't formal. It was open, a patch of living color meant for anyone who'd ever been silenced or small. Every morning, Daniel would visit before dawn. He'd brush dirt from the marker that read, "He planted hope where others saw rules." Sometimes he'd stay only minutes, sometimes hours. He never cried there, not because the pain was gone, but because it had changed shape. It had become purpose. When a video of veterans planting flowers outside a VA hospital went viral, the movement grew roots deeper than anyone expected. Lawmakers started calling. Petitions spread across all 50 states. Within 3 months, the Ethan's Garden Act was introduced, a bill promoting accessible public gardens for disabled children, veterans, and families in restrictive housing zones. The preamble quoted Daniel's courtroom words, "You don't need to wear a uniform to stand up for what's right." At the bill's first hearing, senators spoke about empathy, community, and humanity, words that rarely found their way into politics anymore. Cameras caught Daniel sitting quietly in the back row, wearing the same black suit, the sealed trident pinned to his lapel. He wasn't there for attention. He was there because his son couldn't be. When the bill passed, unanimously, the chamber stood in silence. One senator wiped his eyes and said, "For the boy who made the world stop arguing long enough to care." Months later, the first official Ethan's Garden was opened in a small town in North Carolina, the same kind of neighborhood where HOA rules once dictated how kindness looked. Children in wheelchairs watered the soil. Veterans helped build the benches. Nobody asked who was in charge. Nobody measured the flowers. Daniel stood at the edge, his hands in his pockets, watching families laugh. He could almost hear Ethan's voice again, small, bright, full of curiosity. "Dad, look, they're growing," he smiled faintly. "Yeah, bud. They are." A reporter approached, microphone ready. "Commander Kane, can you tell us what this means to you?" Daniel looked over the field of flowers swaying in the wind. He didn't answer right away. Then, softly, "It means my son's still teaching the world to grow." One evening, months later, Daniel received a small envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a folded letter written in shaky handwriting. "Commander Kane, I was one of the HOA members that day. I was the one who called it a violation. I've spent months replaying that moment, and I can't sleep knowing what we did. I've planted a garden in my own yard now, not to fix what I broke, but to remember what I ignored. Every time I see something bloom, I think of your son. I think of how he didn't fight back or argue. He just believed something beautiful deserved to exist. I'm sorry, truly." Daniel read the letter twice. Then he folded it carefully and placed it beneath the photo on his son's nightstand. The one where Ethan sat holding a small potted plant, smiling proudly. "Forgiven," he whispered. A year after the trial, Daniel returned to the SEAL training compound to visit his old team. The men greeted him with quiet salutes, but something was different. At the edge of the obstacle course, near the flagpole, was a small wooden box filled with soil and flowers. A plaque read, "In memory of Ethan Kane, who taught warriors to be gentle." Daniel knelt beside it, hand over his heart. No words, just silence, a silence that said everything. One of the younger SEALs approached him, visibly emotional. "Sir, we all planted these ourselves. Didn't think you'd mind." Daniel smiled. "No, son, I don't mind at all." Over the next few years, Ethan's Garden became a symbol, painted on murals, stitched on jackets, engraved on medals. It wasn't just about flowers anymore. It was about empathy, about seeing humanity where systems saw lines and paperwork. Documentaries were made, books were written, and yet, Daniel remained the same quiet man living in a modest home with a small garden in front. one that never stopped blooming. Every time he passed it, he'd brush his fingers over the petals. "Keep growing, son," he'd say softly. "You're doing good." It was spring again when Daniel stood before the same courthouse steps, now covered in green. Children were laughing, veterans planting beside them. Reporters had come for the 5-year anniversary of Ethan's Garden Day, but Daniel wasn't there for the cameras. He was there to plant one more seed, the same kind his son once held in his hand. He dug a small hole, pressed the soil gently, and paused. He looked up at the sky, blue, endless, forgiving. "You changed them, Ethan," he whispered. "You did what even soldiers couldn't." Then he smiled, that small, tired, proud smile that said 1,000 things without a word. As he stood, wind rippling through the flowers, a child nearby asked, "Who was he planting that for?" Her mother knelt beside her and said quietly, "For someone who showed the world that strength isn't in how hard you fight, but how deeply you love." The camera panned out, the courthouse steps glowing with sunlight, hundreds of flowers moving in the wind like a living sea of color, and at the center of it, a lone figure walking away, not broken, not angry, just at peace. He went to war to protect a country, but came home to teach it how to heal. Before we go on, hit subscribe, so stories like this reach you first.